So this is our woodland walk for the month of March, and I'm here with Sam Gandy, Dr. Sam Gandy, ecologist and nature psychedelics guy. And we've just been planting trees together, and it's been a very difficult month, this month of March. And in our month of March, we focus on self-soothing, emotional regulation, but also co-regulating with others. And so, Sam, we've just planted those trees and it felt incredibly soothing. We were both feeling quite stressed beforehand, but then there's something about digging a hole, putting a tree in, little tiny sapling that was £5 from the supermarket, and knowing that it will become a fruit tree in years to come. Even if we're not there to see it, the fruit tree will bear fruit.
Well, yeah. Hopefully you might get to see some of it. But yeah, there is that saying, isn't there? He or she who plants trees and doesn't walk under the shade of them figured out the meaning of life. Something along those lines, something wholesome.
Yeah. You don't plant it for yourself, you plant it for kind of the
paying it forward. And not obviously just to humans either, but our kind of native fruit trees are really, really good for wildlife as well.
So yeah, will you tell us, Sam, for everybody listening that hasn't heard you speak before, obviously you do some things within ASO and we're going to invite you to do lots more soon, but can you tell us a bit about, just quickly, your journey into psychedelics and into ecology, and then I'm going to ask you a bit more about the benefits of planting trees for mental health and also for the actual ecosystem.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. So just in a nutshell, I've always loved nature for longer than I can remember, and so I guess I funneled that into a academic university career. So I did geography, I did entomology, which is insects, and then I did a PhD in ecology, entomology. So, but as an aside to that, when I started my undergraduate degree course in London at the time, psilocybin mushrooms were legal to purchase on the high street in Camden. So that was my first encounter with psychedelics, was with legal fresh psilocybin mushrooms. And my first few experiences were I guess big experiences in my life, and I've got the kind of mind that's, when it's interested in something, it becomes very interested and engrossed. So I guess that was a sort of trajectory altering time in terms of becoming more interested academically, I guess, in psychedelics and their sort of potentials. But it wasn't until a few years later, when I was part of a symposium at the Conference Breaking Convention, and I gave a talk sort of broadly on this intersection of psychedelics and ecology. And there were other talks there, and I became aware that there was research just starting at this kind of intersection. So David Liu gave a presentation there on this topic, and then that kind of like galvanized me to want to be a part of it in some way.
That's where it all began. Well, for you, that was your seedling being planted. And you've written some papers on nature connectedness and psychedelics.
Yes, and which you contributed to as well.
Tell us a bit about those.
So there's a few different ones. So I'm part of a collaboration with Imperial College, and that was looking. It was a prospective survey design study, so looking sort of taking someone before and then following a long-term follow-up after a psychedelic experience, and that was looking at sort of before and after, but also total lifetime usage of psychedelics and its association with nature relatedness. And we found a very clear relationship between total lifetime usage of psychedelics and people's nature relatedness at baseline. And then I was kind of following that. I was motivated to write a review paper, trying to basically make a case for using psychedelics like psilocybin intentionally as nature connectedness or nature relatedness enhancing agents, and basically stating why that would be wise given the relationship between nature connectedness and good mental health. And then also, you know, making the case how you would do that. And obviously, yeah, you were quite pivotal in that paper in bringing your therapeutic expertise into it. You know, like, because obviously the current medical clinical model is not embedded in nature, and it's quite individualized. And I feel like it would be good for us more broadly to consider other ways of beneficially using psychedelics that sort of fall outside the medical mold,
Yes.
If you will. So I tried to kind of make that case in that paper. And then we both were on, I think, a really interesting qualitative study paper. We were invited to be part of that. David invited me after I had him involved in another paper, and then I invited you on board. And that, to me, was a really fun, interesting paper, because it finally shed some light on how and why psychedelics can shift people's relationships with nature. You know, it's all very well, you know, assessing changes in people's connectedness, but it doesn't tell you what's actually going on. And that, I thought, was a really interesting study, because it shed light on some of the underlying things at play that were changing for people.
Can you say briefly what some of those things are?
Yeah, so there, I mean, there was a bit of a melting pot of different things really in the mix. Experiences of awe in nature were part of it. Interestingly, experiences of transmogrification, so becoming other species or other life forms in your psychedelic experience. So at least in a mental sense, you kind of gain like some kind of perspective of what it is to exist as a non-human entity. But principally and centrally, sort of by far the most important consistently reported kind of mechanism was experiences of interconnectedness with nature under the psychedelic. And that was interesting and kind of not that surprising in a sense, because that awareness of being part of an interconnected greater whole is one of the kind of central foundations of nature connectedness, essentially. And it seems psychedelics, particularly in a nature embedded context, can reliably bring that state of being about.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, that sometimes I think people still see like nature as a bit of a kind of like niche kind of like, oh, nice nature, rather than seeing it as the radical perspective shift of interconnectedness as such a, you know, really kind of politically radical shift of perspective that really has potential to bring some much needed changes. But before we go stratospheric and with all the big picture, tell us about you know, just on a kind of personal level, take it to the personal, whether somebody has used psychedelics or not. Tell us about, from your own experience and also from what the research says, because you know so much about the different kind of, you've done so many literature reviews on all this work. When we plant a tree, first of all, what does it do for us? What does it help us feel? What does the research say it can help us with?
Yeah. So yeah, well, it's interesting to note that there's not actually much work that has been done yet specifically on what I would term like pro-nature conservation behaviors or pro-nature actions, such as habitat creation, restoration, including tree planting. There's a lot of kind of evidence for, you know, having contact with green space, contact with nature, and you know, there's robust evidence to show that it can boost our mental health and reduce stress, anxiety, things like this. But actually rolling up your sleeves and getting stuck in is surprisingly understudied. It's something that I've wanted to do a bit of work on, actually. But just in the last few years, there's some work that started to come to the fore. And what's interesting to note from one researcher who did her PhD on this, I connected with quite recently, Ella Furness, and she's done some great work. And she looked at a few different pro-nature behaviors, and she found an association between tree planting and nature connectedness, which isn't perhaps that surprising, but nature connectedness, you kind of touched on it in what you said before. It's not, you know, I think quite a few people maybe who enjoy nature kind of view it as a pleasant backdrop for other activities. It's not the main event, it's a stage for other activities. Nature connectedness, and that doesn't really necessarily tie into nature connectedness. Nature connectedness is much more about that awareness of being part of a greater whole, of a wider community of nature, the web of life, and the kind of feelings of awe and wonder and appreciation that kind of stem from that. I guess so. I think it's sort of, we know from the literature, it's quite well established that the more nature connected you are, the more predisposed you are to undertaking actions or expressing behaviors that are pro nature, we could broadly say. But I think what's sort of quite likely is that it's a two-way relationship. So as well as those behaviors being predicted by high levels of connectedness, I think that actually undertaking them is more likely to cultivate nature connectedness, because it's much more about active, engaged, experiential interaction with nature.
Yes, in a way that there is something about, I think that's something about why planting a tree specifically, because it's actually really simple. Like, we really just went out there. You don't need anything particular. I mean, obviously it depends where you're going. When you're going to do some videos for us about tree planting, like how to do it, when to do it, all the different particulars. We're going to do a series called Trees, Bees and Beavers.
Nice.
I haven't told you the title yet, but that's the video series for ASA. But there is something about planting a tree where we just dug a hole and put the tree in and then put the mud back on. And it's so magic. Like, we get kind of, our heads turned by mystical experiences in psychedelic worlds. But the magic that little thing, that little bit of wood in the ground, in that mud, those little earthworms we saw, that is going to take root, and that is going to produce, hopefully if we did the holes well enough, is going to produce this amazing, delicious fruit that can sustain loads of people and make apple juice. And so I think there is something incredibly magic about it, and that actually it's really hard to do, because I've loved trees for a long time now. This is where my love of trees began, this place. This is the place where the maple tree, where Asa was born, stands. But like, I've hardly planted any trees really, because it's not part of our culture. Like, it's quite a hard thing to do, to organize. It's not like we do loads of it. But I think it's so incredibly fulfilling. And tell us about that, so that it's worth people just like really doing it, like, if it's not this winter, because it needs to be in the winter. Obviously people in the southern hemisphere could do it soon, but in the northern hemisphere for next winter. But just really making a commitment to do it, because it's a beautiful thing to do. And so quickly tell us about the ecosystem. But so the benefits for us, that sense of connecting to nature, knowing that we're doing something in service of nature, and seeing the magic of nature and the benefits of being outside rather than watching a screen, and doing something for the community and for others. But tell us about the benefit of, like, the field that we just planted that in, putting those trees in. What's that going to bring to the web?
I mean, it's kind of worth noting that we're very we're like one of the most underforested, undertreed nations in Europe. So there's a definite deficit in our tree cover and the amount of trees, and it can be opportunity. There are opportunities to link up and take part in tree planting activities. There tends to be local tree planting groups and stuff, like community groups. For instance, there's one around local to here, the Harbour Woodland Group, and they organise like occasional weekend tree planting forays, and I think that's I think it's a really nice thing to do with like with local community members, with children as well. I planted an oak with my granddad when I was 3, and now it's like a strapping young tree, and
well,
I've
young,
known it.
not so young.
Well, young,
Middle-aged.
I mean, it's young. I'm not so much, relatively speaking, but it's got hopefully, you know, a few centuries,
Yeah. Yes.
to go. But I think, you know, getting outside and into nature is already great. You know, that's already like can be restorative and soothing, and sort of bolster, protect our mental health and boost our well-being and stuff like that. But I think when you're engaging with the outdoors in that kind of way, when you're planting a tree, or you know, doing other things of a similar kind of nature, but then not just that, but you're doing it with other people as well, be it family or local community members. It seems, you know, from your work and the work of others, that nature connectedness and other forms of connectedness, like social connectedness and connectedness to self, they're not that distinct from each other. They're kind of on a continuum or a spectrum, and if you cultivate one area of that spectrum, it tends to sort of result in blooming in other areas. So, and I feel like there's something to be said there, doing kind of group-based, nature-based kind of restorative actions like tree planting. But,
because it's coming out of it's breaking the old patterns. We get stuck in these kind of real, you know, there's so many social patterns around, you know, what we do in our leisure time. Like there's a lot of Netflix, and there's a lot of, you know, kind of online-y stuff. And when we connect to one area, it's just coming out of disconnection back into connection. It doesn't matter where you begin, whether it's connecting to community or connecting to nature, or however you're connecting, you're plugging back into the life source energy. So even if sometimes people feel like it's difficult to go outside if the weather is bad, and it's easier to watch a movie indoors, or like do some scrolling, it's remembering that when we do all of that, we're plugged into a very flat source, a very disconnected kind of deadened force. And then when we do anything that's about connecting with community or connecting with nature, we're plugging into amazing, powerful life force energy that
it's nourishing rather than extractive ultimately. You know, I mean, even for, you know, for like doing you know, good, using your time non-frivolously on the internet, like it's still sapping your attentional resources, you know, even if you're using it purely like benignly and positively, like it's taking from you in some way, even if you're giving something back. So but when you know, as soon as you step outside and you're, you know, we evolve, with like 99.99% of our existence as a species has been spent in living in natural settings, in wild settings, you know, like this, living in sort of four walls with a roof, and nature tends to be kept at arm's length outside those walls for, you know, in many cases. Like that's a very, very, very recent thing, really, and we still possess the brains and the physiology of our 200,000-year-old ancestors, really Paleolithic ancestors. So but I like what you're saying, you know, about the, you know, the mystical nature of it, in terms of, you know, it might not have, like, in some sense, the, you know, the firework sort of you know, glitz of the psychedelic kind of mystical experience, but it's still like nature in its own way. It's sort of like, it is kind of like has a very special, I mean, the fact that like we're alive and conscious, and the fact that we're on a planet that's like teeming and rich with life in the universe is like, I mean, that, you know, whatever the explanation, if you want to go scientific, spiritual, like it's amazing. We're just even here and conscious of it and a part of it. And so just the endless richness, diversity of form, tenacity of life, and then planting those trees, obviously, like, as well as, you know, benefiting us directly from being able to take part in restorative actions, that those trees can, like, you know, potentially like go on for centuries. And they're providing habitat and food for many species. I mean, for instance, like take an oak tree, you know, which is one of our sort of, we've got more old oaks here in the UK than anywhere in the world. Like, while we don't do so well in the tree stakes, we do well in the old oak stakes. And there's like 2,600 species, I think, that are partially or fully dependent on oak trees. So they are a keystone species in the ecosystem, but also basically an ecosystem unto themselves to many small little things, be it insects or lichens or whatever else. So yeah, it's that sort of trees sort of give one big bang for your buck. That are fruit trees, particularly really good for pollinators early in the year. They also, if you want to go for a climate change angle, they're long-term carbon stores as well. Bit of carbon. So yeah, there's a good bang for your buck on by a few different metrics on a few different fronts.
They're good friends to have.
Yeah.
And maybe we will talk again in July when we visit the oak tree. Our tree for July is the oak tree, and maybe we'll do another little video of you by your oak tree that's almost the same age as you, and look at some of the species that live around the oak tree and see if we can spot some of them.
Cool.
And
okay.
And we'll be inviting you back for your Trees, Bees and Beavers series soon.
That would be a good follow-up, because I'm sure some people will have some be intrigued about the whole beavers, trees.
Oh yes.
How can you appreciate both of those things? But we will unpack that, explore that.
Yes. Yeah, we have a lot of love for beavers and the amazing chaos they can create and the wetlands they can engineer. So we will revisit that topic very soon. Thank you everyone for listening to our woodland walk in the trees.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.